At 03:12 hours on March 4, 2026, every radar operator aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt looked at their screens and saw the impossible. 44 ghost ships, 44 vessels that didn't exist, painted across the Gulf with perfect digital precision. Iranian electronic warfare had just turned the most advanced navigation network on the planet into a funhouse mirror. And somewhere in that chaos of false signals and vanishing contacts, a real tanker was already burning. This is the Strait of Hormuz, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, the most economically critical stretch of water on Earth. Every single day, roughly 20% of the world's oil supply squeezes through this corridor. 17 million barrels. Gone. Because on March 2nd, 2026, Iran's Revolutionary Guard made an announcement that shook every trading floor, every defense ministry, and every naval command center simultaneously. The strait was closed, not to everyone, just to you. China's flagged vessels, unrestricted passage. Russia's flagged vessels, unrestricted passage. Everyone else, direct threat of force. The message from Tehran was surgical and deliberate. This was not random aggression. This was Iran cashing a geopolitical debt, rewarding the two powers that had kept its economy breathing through years of sanctions and military pressure. And it worked. Within hours of the announcement, Brent crude rocketed past $90 a barrel. Shipping insurance rates tripled overnight. The global economy didn't panic, it convulsed. But the blockade was only half the weapon. The other half was invisible. And invisible was the part that genuinely terrified U.S. Naval Command. Here's what AIS is, and why what Iran did to it was genuinely shocking. The Automatic Identification System is the maritime equivalent of civilian air traffic control. Every commercial vessel above 300 tons broadcasts its position, speed, heading, and identity on a shared frequency. It keeps ships from colliding. It allows port authorities to plan arrivals. It allows the U.S. Navy to track every surface contact in a theater of operations in real time. When it works, it's invisible infrastructure. When someone poisons it, the entire maritime picture collapses. Iranian electronic warfare teams had been pre-positioning for weeks. What U.S. naval intelligence eventually confirmed was staggering in its scope. 92 separate AIS blackout zones across the Gulf, areas where real ship signals were being actively jammed and suppressed. And 44 spoofing zones, locations where Iranian transmitters were injecting completely fabricated vessel data into the maritime tracking network. Real ships disappeared from screens. Ghost ships appeared on airport runways. A Kuwaiti LNG tanker showed up on radar as if it were parked in downtown Tehran. The Gulf, for the first time in the modern era, had gone navigationally dark. Inside the USS Theodore Roosevelt's Combat Information Center, the watch officers weren't panicking. They were trained for electronic warfare environments. But the scale of this campaign was something different. One officer later described it as trying to navigate a city where someone had moved every street sign to the wrong block, then turned off the lights. The carrier strike group had 18 surface contacts it could no longer positively identify. In the Strait of Hormuz, with IRGC patrol boats authorized to use deadly force, the margin for error was essentially zero. Then at 07:43 on March 4th, the situation stopped being theoretical. A tanker identified as operating under Kuwaiti registry detonated off the northwestern approaches to the strait. The explosion was not an accident. Post-blast analysis would confirm the signature of a limpet mine, a magnetically attached device placed on the hull during an earlier IRGC boarding inspection. 5 crew members were killed. 40,000 tons of crude oil began spreading across the Gulf, and the world's remaining operational tanker captains looked at that smoke column, and made the same calculation. We are not going through there. 5 ships transited the strait that entire day. 5. On a normal day, the number exceeds 80. The economic chokehold was now total, and Iran's electronic warfare umbrella meant that any naval force moving to reopen the corridor would be doing so half-blind, surrounded by fake contacts, with no reliable way to distinguish a civilian vessel from an IRGC attack craft until it was close enough to see with the naked eye. This was the trap. Sophisticated, patient, designed by people who had studied American naval doctrine for 40 years and built a weapon specifically to defeat it. What Iran did not account for was that the United States Navy had spent the last decade building systems for exactly this environment. The P-8A Poseidon doesn't rely on AIS. It uses synthetic aperture radar that photographs the ocean surface at photographic resolution from 30,000 feet. It doesn't care what a ship is broadcasting. It sees the physical hull, the wake pattern, the thermal signature of the engines. You can poison the digital network all you want. You cannot spoof physics. Within 6 hours of the spoofing campaign's full activation, the Roosevelt Strike Group had rebuilt its operational picture using an entirely different data layer. Every IRGC patrol boat positively identified. Every legitimate commercial vessel tracked by hull signature rather than beacon. The 44 ghost ships were now invisible to US sensors. The 92 blackout zones were mapped. The Iranian electronic warfare infrastructure that was generating the false signals had been triangulated to 17 fixed, shore-based transmitters and 4 mobile platforms operating aboard converted fishing vessels. The Roosevelt Strike Group did not fire a single kinetic weapon to neutralize Iran's electronic warfare campaign. The response was colder than that. Significantly colder. 2 EA-18G Growler electronic attack aircraft launched from the Roosevelt at 1847 hours. These are not fighters. They are flying electromagnetic weapons. Each Growler carries the AN/ALQ 99 tactical jamming system and the next generation AN/ALQ 249 next generation jammer. Their mission was precise. Don't destroy the Iranian transmitters. Blind them, then hijack them. In a classified engagement window lasting 31 minutes, the Growlers systematically overpowered each of the 17 shore-based Iranian transmitters. Then, using directed electronic signal injection, they flipped the system. The fake AIS contacts didn't disappear. They moved. Iranian Naval Command, watching their own screens, now saw their patrol boats in positions they weren't in. The hunters became confused by their own trap. 3 IRGC vessels, operating on orders based on corrupted positional data, maneuvered to intercept contacts that didn't exist, leaving a 12-mile navigational corridor through the northern approach uncontested and unobserved. At 22:04 hours on March 4th, the first non-Chinese, non-Russian commercial tanker transited the Strait of Hormuz under U.S. Navy escort. Then a second. Then 7 more before dawn. Iran's blockade, announced with maximum strategic confidence 72 hours earlier, had been surgically dismantled without a single American missile fired. The cost analysis tells the entire story. Iran invested an estimated $340 million in its electronic warfare infrastructure across the Gulf. Shore stations, mobile platforms, personnel, years of deployment and calibration. The Kuwaiti tanker they destroyed cost $180 million. 5 crew members dead. The oil spill cleanup will run another $90 million. Total Iranian investment and damage inflicted, over $600 million. The United States expended 2 Growler sorties. Fuel, ordnance, flight hours, approximately $1.4 million. Iran spent $600 million to hold the strait for 72 hours. America spent $1.4 million to reopen it in 31 minutes. Tehran announced a strategic victory. The satellite imagery showed something else. The lesson delivered that night in the Strait of Hormuz had nothing to do with explosions or body counts. It was a lesson in the nature of modern electronic warfare. You cannot blind an enemy who sees you through a different spectrum entirely. You cannot build a trap out of fake signals when your opponent has already mapped every transmitter you own. And you cannot close the world's most critical waterway when the Navy you're trying to stop has spent 40 years building systems designed specifically to keep it open. The Gulf is still tense. The standoff is not over. Iran's electronic warfare capability was degraded, not destroyed. The IRGC still has patrol boats, still has mines, still has the political will to push. And somewhere in Tehran, military planners are already studying what happened on March 4th, looking for the gap they missed. The next move is coming. The only question is whether they'll find an approach the Growlers can't flip. If you found this breakdown valuable, subscribe and share. The stories that never make the front page are the ones that actually determine the future.